Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's podcast about probably the second best team in Dade County because it's not going very well for the Heat. Going okay for the Miami Hurricanes basketball team. We are joined, as always, by our Heat beat writer here at the Herald, Anthony Chiang. Anthony, what's going on?
I'm doing well, David. How far? I think you tweeted this yesterday, but how far away does April feel? Like,
Oh my God! I mean,
just with them, not only the Heat but the Panthers as
right?
well.
I was watching the I was actually watching the Panthers last night, covering them remotely, and as the Heat were getting blown out by the Pistons and the Panthers lose a lopsided game out west to the Winnipeg Jets, who were not a playoff team last year. It's at least the Dolphins have a couple more months left in the season potentially because last year it's been actually the last couple of years where it's been like pretty miserable falls, right, with the Dolphins missing the playoffs and Miami being like a 507 win team basically, and the winter teams have kind of saved the day. Obviously the Heat getting to the conference finals, the Panthers winning the President's Trophy, Miami basketball getting to the Elite Eight. Not the case right now with obviously the Panthers. They're below 500 and sitting outside a playoff position right now. And we talk about the Heat here, and the Heat probably their worst loss of the year on Tuesday night to the Pistons, one of the worst teams in the league, and they get blown out really. Obviously no Jimmy Butler, but that's the kind of loss that it doesn't matter who's missing from the lineup. You can't lose by 15 plus points to a team like the Pistons.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to kind of go back to our discussion with the Panthers and the Heat. Like, they're going through similar things right now after like such great seasons last year, but the Panthers made a big move, right? The complaint has been
very differently.
Yeah, the complaint has been like they didn't do anything. They brought everybody back. They ran it back. Things are stale, and that might be true, but the Panthers, on the other hand, tried to shake things up, and so far it hasn't worked out. So it's interesting how kind of like they went about it very differently this offseason, and they're both kind of in the same place.
Yeah, I will also say the one similarity is I think most fans going through the offseason were kind of frustrated with. I think people were okay with the Kachuk trade, but some of the other moves the Panthers made in the offseason I think frustrated people. And obviously similarly with the Heat, that some of the moves or the non-moves they made I think frustrated a lot of people. I guess we will kind of litigate that as we go through this podcast and probably future podcasts because clearly this Heat team, whether what's their record right now, 11 and 14. Yeah. They're probably not going to finish 10 games below 500, which is basically what their pace is right now, right? Like I think we think this team is at the very least still a playoff team, a middle bottom of the pack playoff team in the East. It'll probably be around 500 or something like that. But clearly, I mean, I think we're at the point now, more than a quarter into the season, where unless they make a big move at some point, which seems pretty unlikely, it's clearly just not the same team as last year. And obviously, like you said, it is the same team as last year in a lot of ways, with so much of the roster coming back. Like, who would have thought that just losing PJ Tucker would have like totally kind of, I don't want to say tanked this team because again, they're still probably going to be a playoff team, all that kind of stuff. But who would have thought that just losing PJ Tucker would change things so much? It's obviously not just about losing PJ Tucker.
Sure.
It's just, things change from year to year. The shape of the league changes from year to year. Players' skill levels improve and deteriorate from year to year. And I think the one concern we had going into the offseason was not necessarily that they were going to run it back, because I think there was a lot of, you go to the Eastern Conference Finals, like it means you have a pretty good roster, but the way that the rest of the league, the Celtics, every other contender pretty much except the Mavericks really like went out and upgraded and the Heat didn't. Now, of course, the problem, that doesn't explain why you lose a game like Tuesday night to the Pistons or Monday night to the Grizzlies without Ja Morant. So what is, we kind of end up doing the same thing every week. Like, what the heck is wrong with this team? But coming off these two games that are, the Grizzlies, I know the Grizzlies are good even without Ja, and were really good without Ja last year. But that was definitely kind of a missed opportunity on Monday night. And then Tuesday night, just kind of inexcusable. What's going wrong for these guys right now?
I just don't think, and we've said this before, like, I don't think they have an identity, right? Like, I don't know if it's because so many guys are in and out of the lineup and the identity changes from game to game based on like who's available and who's not, and it's just kind of messed with things. Even though last year he missed a lot of guys too.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing,
and they overcame it. So it's hard to make that as an excuse, but it is reality. Like that can affect the team. But like big picture, I just think a lot of guys have taken a step back, right, from last year. Like they were relying so much on internal improvement because they brought pretty much everybody back. And so far, they just haven't had really that internal improvement yet that to translate into kind of building on last season. You have three guys who are averaging 20 or more points in Jimmy, Tyler, and Bam. But other than that, I mean, Gabe Vincent, he's been injured a lot in and out of the lineup, shooting under 30% on threes. Max Strus has had some good games, but he's been pretty up and down and inconsistent. Duncan Robinson is out of the rotation. You're hoping that you were hoping that one of these guys like Haywood Highsmith or one of those developmental guys will like kind of take a step forward. And Haywood Highsmith has flashed the last few weeks, but even him, like he still hasn't really been able to gain like consistent traction this season. And then Victor's just made his season debut yesterday. He hadn't played all year, almost year 7. Gonna be out probably until March at least. So just everybody around like the big three, if you want to call it that, of Tyler, Bam, and Jimmy, they just haven't taken the necessary step forward for this team to even just get close to what it was last season. Last season, there were so many of the guys that were like having career best years.
Right.
And that's just not the case this year. And I could come back to the identity conversation. Their defense has been trending in the right direction. They were top 10, I think, before last night's game after being like 20-something a month ago. So it has been trending in the right direction, although that's a lot because of the zone, right? They've used the zone a lot, and zone has been effective. We've touched on that many times, you and I, David. But the offense is very concerning. 5th worst offensive rating in the NBA. That is definitely not going to cut it. We've said it since last year. Their formula is top 10, ideally top 5 defense, and like just league average on offense, right? Like that would probably get you probably a deep playoff run. They're 12th in defense, not top 10, and they're 5th worst in offense. So
yeah,
they have a long way to go, especially on the offensive end, to get to where they want to be.
Yeah, the other piece obviously is Kyle Lowry, which we were pretty positive about him last week because he was really good on that road trip when he had to be the guy. But then last night only makes one shot. Like he's still more of playoff Kyle Lowry than he was start of last year Kyle Lowry. And that is that ultimately a lot of the trouble with the Heat, not to put it all on Kyle Lowry because he's an aging point guard. Like it's not a surprise that he is starting to fall off as a player. But that was the Heat's move, right? And again, was there another move out there at the time when they traded a whole bunch to get Kyle Lowry? Like not necessarily. Would they have been better off holding those and see if you could use it to get, we always say there's guys always come available if you wait. If they had not traded for Kyle Lowry and hung on to Precious and some of those other assets, would they have been in the mix for Donovan Mitchell? Or, I don't know if Rudy Gobert would have been a fit, but obviously he got traded and would have, was clearly available. And I'm probably missing a couple other stars that they're just slipping my mind who have been dealt in the last couple of years. But their move was Kyle Lowry, and it just kind of frankly has not panned out. And it was going to be fine if Kyle Lowry could be your 4th best player, right? And you could count on Jimmy, like you said, Jimmy, Bam, Tyler to be a big 3. And they've been good, but they haven't been like, I don't think they've been as good as they need to be when Kyle, like when you're building a roster the way that they are. They don't have. I think Jimmy in the playoffs, Jimmy is clearly a top 10 player, but in the regular season, every year in the regular season, he's not necessarily been that. Yeah. Bam is obviously a very unique type of number 2 option. And, probably pretty much like a league, as far as the top teams in the league go, he's probably something close to league average for a number two. And Tyler Hero, I mean, this is really the first year where he's like, I guess last year too, like the first year where he's kind of like being asked to play at like a star level. And, he's been good. He was really good last night. But it's just, they're constructed in a lot of ways like a team that has a big three, and the rest of the roster is kind of just like flotsam and like just pieces, like random little pieces. And their big three right now is not good enough for that. And that obviously that comes back to the issue that they kind of the risk of the building the team the way the Heat has basically since, I mean, going back even further, but like in the Jimmy Butler era where, so much money has been tied up in a handful of guys, which is the case for a lot of teams, obviously. But the Heat, instead of filling their, PJ Tucker was obviously an exception. Like in some ways, I don't think losing PJ Tucker has been a big deal, but it's kind of been like illustrative because like was like the last like established guy that they kind of had, right? They had him and Markieff Morris last year, and Victor Oladipo maybe falls in this category too. Obviously, we haven't seen very much of him, but a guy who like every team, you could put him on basically any team in the league and you'd feel like he'd be pretty useful. Whereas the rest of the Heat roster, even a guy like Duncan Robinson, who's highly paid now, like
developmental guys,
they're Heat developmental guys that if Caleb Martin was playing somewhere else for the last 3 years, he might not be in the league right now, right? Like, the Heat got him on a two-way deal, and he's their fifth best player now. Like it was a really. I mean, the Heat obviously need to be commended for it. It made them a title contender for the last 3 years, basically. But we see how we saw it with Duncan. He's incredible, and then teams figure it out. There's a reason he was undrafted and played Division III basketball, right? Max Strus, maybe some, like you said, had some good games this year, but his story is obviously very similar to Duncan's. The guy who was I think Division II player.
Yeah.
Finished at DePaul, undrafted. He plucks him out of nowhere. He becomes a sharpshooter, and understandably, he's a guy who's not like an every night superstar type player. And you're definitely feeling that with the Heat right now, where all it takes is missing on one of those guys, right? One or two of those guys, and when you've got no vets to kind of lean back on, and like you said, Haywood Highsmith's been promising, but it's the first time in a long time the Heat hasn't just plucked one of these guys out of nowhere and been able to stick them into the rotation. Like, you feel that gap.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, depth wasn't a big strength last season for the Heat, right? And some of that was because PJ Tucker was starting. You had Caleb off the bench. You had Tyler Hero off the bench as the top scoring bench in the NBA. Now I think they're like the fourth or fifth lowest scoring bench in the NBA. A lot of that's because Tyler's now starting. You don't have that scoring punch. You hope Victor can make up for some of that, but how much can you really rely on Victor at this point?
Right.
Like, it's just an accomplishment for him to get on the court last night, right? Can he stay healthy? Can he play consistently? Can he play back-to-backs? Can he play 25, 30 minutes a game? Is he going to be efficient? Like, there's a lot of questions still need to be answered with Victor. It's hard to really rely on him at this point. And then, like, you're also relying on all these guys to continue to get better, like Max Strus, Gabe Vincent, Dwayne Dedmon, he's been very good for the last few years since he got him, but this year, he's dealing with the foot issue. It's limited him. He's in and out of the lineup. His minutes have not been especially productive, for the team as a whole. When he's out there and Bam's not in the game, there's just a lot of holes right now on this roster that I don't know how they plug them. I really don't. Like, it's not like they have, last few years, like, they've always had a guy that's not playing like the 10th or 11th man that Max Strus and Gabe Vincent were those guys like 2 or 3 years ago where, okay, someone's not playing well, put them in there for 20 minutes and see what happens, right? They don't really have that this year. Like, it's the roster just has a very different feel as far as depth goes. And some of that is because of injuries, right? Like, Omer Yurtseven would definitely help at this point. Yesterday, they had to play Jovic as backup center because Dedmon was out. Not ideal. Jovic is not a center. And that's what they have Yurtseven for. It's unfortunate that he's hurt. Victor Oladipo before last night, like, they would really needed a spark off the bench. He wasn't available until yesterday. So injuries have played a role, but at the same time, it's like you said, like, the way the roster is constructed this season, just it feels like depth is not a strength, and that hasn't been the case the last few years where depth was one of their biggest strengths.
Yeah.
And going back to Kyle Lowry, he didn't have a good game last night, but I will say like he was questionable before the game, left ankle soreness, and he played through it because Gabe had to miss the game. And if Gabe, it's not Gabe and Kyle, they don't have a point guard. Kyle's the only one who's played in every game this season.
Yeah,
36 years old.
True.
He's played the second most minutes in the NBA behind only Kevin Durant, which is kind of crazy and obviously not ideal for the Heat for him, him to be playing that many minutes at this age. So, yeah, he didn't have a great game, but he's been the one guy who's always been available.
Yeah, you're right. It is hard to blame him. He catches a lot of flack, obviously, because he was the big move they made. And again, if Jimmy had played in every game this year or like you said, the depth was a bigger strength, like it wouldn't be as big a deal that he has some off nights, which should be expected from a guy who's almost 40 years old, right? Playing point guard in the NBA.
Yeah.
I think another parallel I've been thinking about with them and the Panthers. Well, you mentioned the identity. I think both teams kind of lack an identity. The Panthers are between identities. I think changing coach and trying to go from like their just like run and gun basically, almost like the 7 seconds or less Suns basically, to being like a team that they think can win in the playoffs, like a more defensive minded team, longer possessions, more like grinding ugly shots in front of the net. And with the Heat, and I think the Panthers' theory right now is, they're sitting at, like I said, they're sitting outside the playoffs, but I think ultimately they're like, just make the play. And hockey is different than basketball. Just make the playoffs and you can win, 8 seeds win the Stanley Cup. Like, not all the time, but like it's not unheard of. I think their theory is basically like, just get into the playoffs and this style will work better there. And I think the Heat, it's interesting because so much of what I think the Heat are such a different team in the playoffs, right, than they are in the regular season because Jimmy changes the way he plays. He plays more aggressively, obviously as a scorer. They really like slow the games down, I think, a lot more in the playoffs, which not that they're like a up-tempo team as it stands, but like it's just easier to like grind out defensive wins and lean on Jimmy just being spectacular when you just have to do it, when you're playing every other night. Obviously it's grueling. You still have the way they wore down, but like they have a clear identity in the playoffs. And the same way that I think the Panthers have an identity that they think is going to work in the playoffs, but like once you're 25 games into the year and like the playoffs aren't necessarily guaranteed and different, it's different in the NBA because the Heat will make the playoffs, right? But like,
I think so.
but like being an 8 seed in the playoffs, like that doesn't do
right.
you any good, basically in the NBA.
Sure.
Like when's the last time an 8 seed upset a 1? Like you got to be a top 5 seed, right? I think the Heat were a 5 in the bubble, and there was like the lowest seed to make the finals.
Right, and like
quite
since
a long
1990.
Was it since the Knicks, maybe the 8 seed Knicks in the lockout year? So, I mean, I think both teams are in a position where, like, I think if they get to the playoffs in the position they're in, like in the position they want to be, there are more reasons for hope than there are right now. But right now, it's pretty ugly. And again, I think at the same time the Heat did it's great that they went to the finals in the bubble. It's great that they went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, but they did also have a really, really ugly playoff exit against the Bucks in the middle of that. And this year is kind of starting to feel pretty. That was obviously the COVID year, very weird season. The real COVID season. There was no one in the building, and guys missed long stretches with COVID. This is kind of starting to feel similar to that, where it's like we're just waiting for it to like click into place, right? And it's not.
Yeah, I agree. I was about to make that point. Like, you could say like they have a formula in the playoffs. Jimmy turns into a different player. They have something that we've seen work in the playoffs.
They're playing better defensively, right? If you're
playing better defensively,
if the Heat are top like 6 or 7 in defense, and you have Jimmy Butler, like
you have a chance. You always have a chance.
You got a really good chance.
At the same time, like we saw it 2 years ago when you put yourselves in a position where you're facing an elite team in the first round, like, and you don't have home court advantage, you're probably going to lose the series, right? Like if the Heat end up as the 6th seed and they're facing, I know it's crazy to say Cleveland's a really good team, but they are a really good team and they don't have home court advantage against Cleveland. Like that's a tough series. You don't want to be in that situation, right? You want to be ideally top 4 seed to have home court in the
Yeah.
first round. You don't want to be the 8th seed facing the Celtics in the first round. Yeah, the Heat always have a shot because we've seen this core get it done. But when you're an 8th seed and you're on the road against Boston, like that's a very tough ask for them to win that series. So they need, I guess, the positive, if there is one in all this, is like they're still, I think, just 2.5 back of the 4 seed.
Right, that's the thing.
So like
all they need, like it's kind of the same thing with the Panthers. Like if they win 4 or 5 in a row here, they're coming back for a homestand. Like all of a sudden you're like, all right, like things are okay. Same with the Heat. If they win 4 or 5 in a row, at some point you're like, all right, it's okay. But again, we're waiting for that to happen.
We're continuing to wait, and I think a lot of it is like they just need to get their guys consistently in the lineup to play together, right? Like we've seen them in and out, and we saw last Friday in Boston. Like that was. I guess that and Phoenix were like the 2 best wins of the year, but what we saw in Boston is what we saw last season. Elite defense.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler taking over late in the game. That's the formula for this team, and they just haven't been whole for them to play that style of basketball. They've been having to play a ton of zone because all their best defenders have been out. Jimmy Butler's not there to lead the clutch offense. It's just been, again, I don't want to make an excuse for them, but I think it's played a big role. Just all the moving parts of this team, and they just haven't had the 3-point shooting to make up for it. Last year they shot like a historically good percentage from 3. One of those guys were out to survive. This year they're one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the NBA, and that's the big difference.
So where can they go from here? You mentioned that it doesn't feel like they have the pieces, right? Like, is there? I think everyone's like, can they make a move at some point here?
Yeah.
And that if they're in this kind of position, we're a long way from the trade deadline, so I don't want to like talk too much about potential trades. But like, what's the feeling? Is the feeling that they know they got to make a fix, or is the feeling that they're still, I don't want to say confident, but optimistic that this group can steer their way out of this?
Yeah, I don't want to say they don't have the pieces, right? It does feel like they're like a piece short at this point, but they have most of the pieces, I would think. But
I think Victor, it is worth seeing what they look like now with Victor Oladipo in there a little more.
And Jimmy in the lineup, right? Like he's missed 10 of the first 25 games.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
That is a lot.
So that makes a big difference. I think the Heat still feel like when they're healthy, when they're whole, they're one of the best teams in the East. And they might not be wrong, but it's getting to a point of the season where they have to get going, right? Like they can't, unfortunately for guys, like ideally, a lot of guys are second out of a back-to-back just to get rest in, playoffs big picture, you want to be healthy. But they got to fight their way for playoff positioning at this point. Like in a month, we're going to be halfway through the schedule.
Yeah.
It's not going to be early anymore. So one of the other positives is, and we could very easily in 2 weeks, David, be like, oh, wow, they fixed everything. They're now number 4 in the East. 7 of the next 10 games come against sub-500 teams. And it was 8 of 11. We count last night. But they lost. Yeah. They missed that opportunity. This is a stretch that they need to take advantage of. Mm-hmm. And they should take advantage of. Playing San Antonio twice, you play OKC, you play the Bulls, you played Detroit last night. Like, you have some very, very winnable games. You play the Rockets. I guess the Lakers are playing better, but they play the Lakers. Like, they have very winnable games coming up, and they could go on a run right now. Right, I wouldn't be shocked by that. And all of a sudden, they are above 500 and they're 4th in the East. So that's possible, but there are still issues that need to be fixed. And yeah, beating bad teams is what good teams do. But until they consistently put together like quality wins and avoid these bad losses, it's hard to have any confidence in this team at this point.
Yeah, I've always promised to not overreact if they have a 3-win week against
that's the problem.
Teams here, right?
Yeah, like that's the thing. I can see us very easily next week. Like they play the next 3 games, Clippers, which are decent, but then they play the Spurs. The 2 of the next 3 games are against. I think 2 of the next 3 games are 2 of their only games against winning teams, like in the next 3 weeks. So
is that Clippers?
Coming week is one? Clippers and the Pacers, which not elite
Pacers,
teams.
Big game.
Jason Pacers. Yeah, Pacers have been playing well. They already beat Miami in Indianapolis. But yeah, they after that, it's OKC, Houston, San Antonio. the Bulls, Pacers, Timberwolves, Lakers. So yeah, I mean, 2 weeks we could be here overreacting, saying they're back and they're going to win the championship. Probably not. But let's make a promise not to overreact to 4 or 5 wins out of 7 games, because the schedule does get kind of soft here.
Yeah. Honestly, you mentioned they need to get some good wins against good teams. Like, they have a couple of those, right? Like, we have seen like the A performance from the Heat, like the Phoenix game, which obviously Chris Paul didn't play in. And
Golden State.
Golden State was a good win. And Boston, as you said on Friday, which is a game that I think if the Pistons game had just taken care of business last night, that would have been what we talked mostly about this game, because was an incredible win for the Heat. Jimmy Butler was spectacular. They bounced back from I'd say like frustrating loss 2 nights before, right? They had a chance to probably win that game up in Boston and let the Celtics kind of run away in the fourth quarter. It right now it's more about the like terrible losses, I think, than anything. Yeah. And as you said, like, good teams beat those teams. Good teams also beat those teams like badly, right? And I think that's what's the difference with the Heat right now. And when I talk about, there's reasons to think that when they get to the playoffs and they can play their A game on a more regular basis, because I think they have just like I said, a clear identity when they get there. That they're clearly not the favorite in the East, and they're clearly a cut below, I think, Boston and Milwaukee and probably even Cleveland at this point. No matter kind of where they get in the regular season, it feels like. But right now, the problem is like they're inconsistent, and part of that, like you said, is obviously guys in and out of the lineup. But even when the guys are out there, like, they put up stinkers like kind of regularly. Even when they've got Jimmy in the lineup, they've lost. I don't know what the record is when he's in the lineup. It's obviously better than their overall record. But it's not like incredible. It's not like they're like 7-3 when he's in there or whatever. Like, or 8-2. It might be 7-3. But like, it's not overwhelming. It's not at the point where you're like, just get him healthy and it's fine. Like, they're relying on a lot of kind of below average NBA players to play a lot of minutes, and that's not a recipe for success, obviously.
So what do you think is the ceiling for this team at this point?
I think the ceiling for this team, I think it's going to be, unless, barring some incredible turnaround, like Celtics-like turnaround, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's kind of I think, like, the way I keep
thinking about that, by the way. I keep thinking about the Celtics last year.
It's such an outlier. It's such an outlier. Like, I think we have to just remember that is like one of the best second half, like one of the most improbable midseason turnarounds of all time, and not think of it like that. I mean, it probably means that the Heat ceiling is like the 4 seed, right? Like, I think Boston, Milwaukee, Cleveland to me look like the clear top 3 in the East. I think that you win a first round series. I don't know who would be maybe you get Philly again in the first round.
Pacers or Hawks or
I mean, I still expect the Pacers to kind of fall off. You win a first round series. I think the ceiling is basically you play a really competitive. You run into one of those really good teams. I think Milwaukee or Boston, if that's your second round opponent, you play a really competitive series with them and probably come up a little short, similar to last year. Maybe if you get Cleveland in round 2, you could pull off an upset in that series because they're a younger team that not bad. Kind of the same way they beat Milwaukee in the bubble, right? Like a team that wasn't necessarily quite ready, probably, and the Heat, just with Jimmy Butler's sheer will and all that kind of stuff, could pull out the win. But I mean, it's hard to see them. And again, I expect a competitive series if they get into one of those because of the track record we've seen from the Heat, but it's hard to see them cracking that top tier. That, again, I keep putting Cleveland there, but really the Milwaukee, Boston,
based on the class of the East.
That's the class of the East.
Yeah, I agree. And you and I have been on here, I think, feel like trying to calm fans down, right? After like all these bad losses, like, oh, things are gonna get better, like when they get healthy, and they're still a really good team. We've seen it, but I'm at the point where I'm not saying like it's time to panic, but it's getting close, right? Like,
I'm doing the same thing with the Panthers the last 2 weeks, basically. Like, they've had all these moments where they could, right? Like, they had a homestand last week. They beat Boston, who's the best team in the league, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, they figured it out, and then they promptly like blow a huge lead to St. Louis and lose a couple of games on the road, and Yeah, it's similar.
Sometimes it's just who a team is, right? Like
Right.
500 teams will do that. A 500 team will
Bad
win.
teams beat good teams sometimes.
Yeah, like at some point we have to realize like maybe this is who this year's Heat team is, like just a inconsistent team who can really beat any team on any given night, but can also lose to any team on any given night. Like you can't really like just expect something because they haven't earned that, right? Like they haven't been consistent. Again, injuries have a lot to do with it, but there just hasn't been a consistent identity that you could just bank on and be like, okay, they're gonna do this. So if they make like last year, right? If they made 40% of their threes, we knew they were gonna win because the defense was always there.
Right.
The defense was always on. So if they had a good shooting night, they were winning because you knew at a baseline like our defense is gonna be really, really good. This year, there's not that. Like they've lost, I think, 2 or 3 games already where they've shot over 40% because their defense is not as reliable. So there are very little reliable things you can count on.
Yeah.
With this season's team,
they
I
don't
think
do
that's
anything
their
like
problem.
super well, right?
No.
That's the thing. Last year they shot the 3 really well and they defended really well. Like those were two calling cards they kind of had. And then you had Jimmy Butler, right? Like who, in crunch time, he's one of the better guys in the league. And right now they're not shooting well. They're not defending particularly well. Those you noted we're maybe getting there. And Jimmy Butler just hasn't been in there enough to like will you to victory as he will do, kind of like 10 times a year or whatever, right? Like that's what superstars do is like you just get a free number of wins basically when you have a guy like that out there, and he hasn't been out there enough to get you that one win a week where it's just like he's so spectacular that he pulls out in the fourth quarter or whatever.
Yeah. Do you think like Victor Oladipo can help?
I like Victor Oladipo. I think we were both pretty optimistic about him coming into the year. I think for a team that is, like you said, they're not shooting the 3 as well, which means they need to find different ways to score. Just his downhill ability should do a lot for this team. And defensively, right, like he was another, when we talked about what this team has a potential to be defensively, he's a part of that, right? Like we were like, is he crunch time 5 in the playoffs? Is he going to be in it because he's that good of a defensive player? So, I'm not expecting him to come out and every night be spectacular. And, did I predict him? Was my bold prediction that he was going to win 6th man of the year in the preseason? I think. Like that's not going to happen, obviously.
He finally made a bold prediction after last year.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not going to happen. I mean, I guess if he's incredible and it turns the Heat season around, he could win it.
When he averages 28 points a game on 50% shooting for the rest of the year, he'll win.
I don't think he even needs to be that good. I think if he comes back and he sparks a turnaround, like if they're like, you know what, changing the Heat season is getting Victor Oladipo back, like that fixed things for them. But I'm not expecting that, obviously. Yeah. But I think if he, he on paper fills some of those holes that we've been wondering about with the Heat. So I think I'm not going to say he's going to make a difference because he's played a big difference because he's played so few games over the last 3 years or whatever. It's like hard to know exactly what you're going to get. But if you get the Victor Oladipo we saw in the playoffs, like that'll help this team a lot.
Yeah, right. You don't know what you're going to get because you don't know if he's going to be able to stay healthy and play big minutes consistently.
Right, and
but he does
his burst and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
hold up. But.
Right. It's been just one game, but he does like theoretically, I guess, check a few boxes that the Heat needs.
Yeah.
To improve on, right? Like a point of attack defense, just another dynamic scorer, a guy who can create for his own and create for others. Like they need that, especially off the bench, because now with Tyler Hero starting, they desperately need a spark off the bench. So, yeah, I think Victor can help. Is he the answer to all the Heat's problems? Definitely not. But if he can stay healthy and give them, 20 to 25 solid minutes off the bench, that would fix one of the Heat's issues. So, I think he'd have to hope that he can just continue to get stronger, get better, and just stay available because the Heat need him. I think they really do need him if they're going to reach their ceiling. Yeah.
All right. I think we can wrap things up there unless you got anything else. We'll be back next week, though, to overreact to a couple wins, maybe. I'll say, if they have a good week here, like you said, they got some – I'm not going to get too excited about them beating the Pacers despite the Pacers record, but that would be a big win just because
it's a good win.
When we're talking about playoff positioning, which is a concern for this team right now, right? Like, I know there's 60 games left, right? But we're getting to the point where like you kind of know who the tiers are, right? And every win against a team in your tier is kind of important, and that would kind of qualify at this point. I mean, again, like I think Indiana will fall out at some point, but who knows? So
just stringing together wins at this point,
right?
No matter who it is big, and it feels like every other week in this episode, like 1 week we're like
I know
things were they finally turn the corner. Next week, everything's bad. They finally got some wins.
I think we can't overreact to individual wins, right? Like because that's like you said, that's the identity. It's trends, and you win 3 in a row. None of these individual wins, I don't think, would be super exciting, right? Like, when is them? Are those 3 games in our recording in our window before our next recording? L.A. What did we say? San Antonio,
Spurs, Indiana? It's Clippers, Spurs, Pacers.
Yeah. So those are all in the next week before we record next time.
Yes, and
so
the only one that's out on the road is the Pacers next month.
Right. So like none of those wins individually are like that exciting, but like you said, they got to string wins to get. What I need to see from this Heat team right now is like a 5-game winning streak.
Yeah, and just consistent, like an identity, right? Like some type of like consistent thing you can bank on, which there is nothing right now.
Yeah. All right. You can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. Follow him for all of your Heat stuff if you want to read about it right now. You can follow me on Twitter at DBWilson2. You follow me for all your Panthers stuff if you want to read that right now. So we'll see if they can turn this thing around. I think, but no matter what they do in the next week, we're not going to overreact. We'll have the same complaints probably when we come back next week. Although
I can already see it. Have the Heat figured it out?
I'm excited to see Victor Oladipo. Maybe we'll come back and be like, can Victor Oladipo win 6th Man of the Year because he's going to be spectacular in the next couple of games?
Yeah, we'll see.
All right. Thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.